Hi, I'm Rich Baker from Rollin' and Riches, and this is Improv Breakdown.
So I think that what the audience loves to see is collaboration, and they love to see hope. They love to see people thinking it can be better.
Yes!
What?
Turn on the microphone.
You asked for it.
This is gorgeous.
Me?
Get in the lap. Get in the lap.
Welcome to the Improv Breakdown. My name is Rich, and I am extremely excited for my guest today. If you do improv and you haven't heard of my next guest yet, I'm honored to be your entry point. He is the human being behind an improv fan page that spotlights the improv teachers, companies, and performers that positively influence improv, called the Improv Boost, which does so much for the international improv community. It has more than 1,100 followers on Instagram and 29,000 followers on Facebook. Recently produced the Everybody Get In Here Online Improv Festival, which received an engagement of 16,000 with 51,000 total views. That's in only 1 week, and I was honored to be a part of that myself. So many people were involved. He's the author of multiple books, including this improv book and Answers from Improv Teachers. I'm so excited to talk with the man, the myth, the legend, David Escobedo. Thank you for being on the Improv Breakdown.
Wow, thank you so much. That was a great introduction. I don't think I've ever been introduced That's awesome. Thank you so much.
It was your introduction. The only hard part about it was like having to leave stuff out. You've done so much. We're not going to cover it all, but we'll get to as much as we can.
Awesome. How are you doing?
Oh man, I'm great. I live in LA. It's sunny. I'm healthy. Like, I'm the luckiest person in the world.
That's fantastic. So I live in England now. I'm from San Diego originally, and then I lived in LA for a long time, and I'm in England now. Today was a nice day. I was talking to my wife about it. It was 40 degrees. Like, oh, you just have to put on a jacket. But last week it was so freaking cold. We had the heater on, the fireplace going, and a blanket, and we're like, oh, it's still cold. So like, oh man, it's shorts weather now. 40 degrees shorts weather.
Is that 40 degrees? I don't know Celsius. Are you still in Fahrenheit, or do you do the Celsius now?
I get confused, but that's to the California weather, which is Celsius, isn't it?
No, we're Fahrenheit here.
That's Fahrenheit.
Right? Because like all
America doesn't do the metric. You know, like America does feet and inches, and we do like centimeters and meters here. I always have to like translate. I don't know. I get confused.
Oh yeah. Anytime like one of my a friend of mine from Britain or Europe or anywhere says what temperature it is, I'm like, I don't have any idea what that means.
Yeah, talk about like time zones, and then I've gotten into baking bread, and it'll give you like, what are the number of cups? Nope, it's pints or grams or whatever. Give me a spoon. What kind of spoon do I use? So yeah, it's have to translate all the time.
Oh my God, I love it. David, at one point in your life, you weren't an improviser, and how did improv and you meet?
Oh, that's a great question. So my drama teacher, I'm sure I saw a theater play before this, but the first time I realized what theater was in high school. So I was about 17, and I had my first drama teacher, Monica Ionessa. I'm still friends with her on Facebook. She's amazing. She's super, and it's funny because I moved to West Hollywood, and then lo and behold, she was one of my neighbors in West Hollywood. It was like, wow. Oh my God, my high school drama teacher. So we've stayed in touch. It's awesome.
That's cool.
So she, especially in high school, she taught drama, or the skills of drama, like projection and emotions and characters, through a lot of what we would consider short form improv games, or maybe theater games. So stuff like one word story or party quirks, do all these like games. And so in high school, especially right after I graduated high school, I was like, I still want to do those games. Those games were fun, and they're free. And especially in California, you're not old enough to drink yet. So like, what do you do on your weekends? And so what we would do is, my dad owned this Camaro that was a 76 Camaro, nice Camaro, but it's always parked in the garage. You know, that thing cannot get a scratch on it.
Okay.
So we put it neutral. We would push it out of the garage, and in that empty space, I put masking tape on the ground, and I got like the mechanics lights and my dad got the mechanics lights and hung them from the ceiling. So we had this little makeshift stage. No audience. We just invite my friends over, and we would just play these short form games, like maybe 3 times a week, just for fun. What do you guys do tonight? You want to come over and play Zip Zap Zop? Awesome. You want to come over and play Party Quirks? Yeah, cool. Just make each other laugh and have fun. And it wasn't for a little while later that I realized, this is actually a performance style. People can come and watch this. But that's how I was interested in improv.
For you, it was like board game night.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. This is 1994, too. So this was like pre-AOL still had like the 3 pictures and whatever it was. So there wasn't like Google an article about it. It was just more like what could you kind of watch on Whose Line Is It Anyways if I stayed up late enough at night? And then like I read a couple books, but there was not the scope of work there is out there now.
Oh, not even close. Yeah, 94. Like, I mean, I hadn't even heard of improv at that point. Like, you were early in the movement.
It's really cool. Well, but I didn't realize at the time. I just did it because it was fun. Which it's so weird because a lot of us get into improv because it's fun. Oh, this is fun, and I'm making friends. And then a year later, you're like, let's analyze the scene. And then like, oh my gosh, I'm not this person's friend anymore, kind of thing. But because I think we always need to come back. Why did you do it in the first place? Because it was fun and you connected to people. But I didn't realize at the time that what I was doing was I was researching, analyzing, and then I had to figure out how to simplify it to teach it to other people and teach them how they could be funny at it too. All I knew was I was teaching my friends these games and I like to have fun. But I didn't realize that I was like doing this whole process of like, well, here's how Party Quirks works. Here's what makes it funny. Here's how good, bad, worst works. Like, this is what makes it funny is you have that escalation. And like, but I didn't know it at the time. I just knew I was trying to explain these games to my friends. That's it.
Wow. So you were teaching like before you were even performing in front of audiences.
Yeah, but you like, so I relate a lot when I hear people saying like, there's no improv team in my city, or there's only one group in my city and they don't hold auditions. Like I totally relate to that because that's the way it was. I was in San Diego. I was in a city called Escobedo, which is North County, San Diego. It was cow fields and avocado fields. Like it was very rural at the time. So I had to I just had to find these little scopes of like, okay, here's why this game is funny, but also invent your own games. Like, why is this game funny? What's the gimmick of this game? Okay, so then how can we utilize this in another way? How can we utilize this in another way? Where's the nexus at which the audience is having fun? So for that group, it was called The Orphans. It ran for 13 years. The whole philosophy is, where's the audience interaction? Whatever the game is, where's the audience interaction? Because the audience loves to go yell something out. We invented this game called Dark and Stormy Night. And the whole concept was someone was reading like a detective or a mystery, it started off with, it was a dark and stormy night. Nice. And as they're reading it, the actors are acting it on stage and the actors don't know what the story is. Only the author knows what it is. And at any point, people in the audience can yell rewrite. And so the author has to go back and rewrite what was just said. So it's kind of like New Choice meets a dime store novel kind of amalgamation. Yeah. But the audience loved when we announced it, yay, because they had I'm interacting, I'm affecting what's happening on stage, but it still gave us a lot of control because they're just yelling rewrite and the author can kind of decide how far to take it or escalate it or whatever.
Super cool. You're literally teaching, you're inventing games, you're coming up with your own philosophies on improv out of your garage.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I was 17. Thank you. But I'm sure other people have had that very similar situation of like, I have to be resourceful in order to practice improv. And so sometimes people find that struggle of like, where do I find the knowledge or the whatever it is, the coaching or whatever. It's much better now that we have the social media. Sure. But I relate to that.
Wow. Yeah, I was lucky. I was in a town that happened to have improv earlier than most small market towns, and so I had a model, so but you were like, I don't know, let's try this.
What town are you talking? You in Chicago, weren't you?
No, I'm from Fort Worth, Texas originally.
Okay.
Yeah. So 4-day weekend has been, obviously not in the pandemic, but prior to that, they've been having a consistent improv show there since '97.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have been through Fort Worth before. I was part of a touring company that drove from LA up into Canada to Maine and then came back down through Florida and everything. And we stayed in Fort Worth for one show and it was really hot that day. I totally remember that. And we stayed at a pool where the ants were crawling all over the pool. And I'm like, shouldn't they be drowning? There's
Sounds like my hometown. Yep. So obviously you start in the garage, but at what was it like finding your identity as a performer?
Oh my God, that's a great question. I think because I was forced to kind of forge my own path, it forced me to, I didn't realize that I was developing my own style. And I didn't realize that instead of like someone like laying out jargon for me, I had to be very analytical for watching a set and discovering why it worked, and then reading about it in a book, and then finding kind of the connection between those two and everything. So that when I did eventually end up moving to LA, I went to college at Cal State Long Beach, and I ended up moving up to LA, and I ended up taking Second City and IO classes, and I took like a couple workshops at the Groundlings and all this kind of stuff. And then hearing what their thoughts on improv was, it's different because there's this great book I love called The Pixar Way, and Pixar talks about the first time you develop an art form or you develop a project, it's probably the most creative you'll ever be because you're kind of forced to be creative. You have to figure out these mechanisms. But then as you go along and become an institution or become more and more of a business, you have to become more efficient. So the reality is you lose the creativity, but you create this efficiency that allows you to put effort and money into this mechanism that then allows you to have that same signature product or that same thing. So I'd go to classes, and one thing that I thought was weird was that the teachers would tell all these students, this is how it works, this is how it works, this is how it works. And then the whole class, all the students would do that. Cool. They learned that skill. Then the next day, it'd be like, okay, now it's about character. Da, 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 da. And I'd find that most of the students would do character, but then they'd forget what the last class was about. And then you go to the third class. Okay, let's do tag outs. And they do tag outs. They're doing tag outs. And they're like, but now no one's doing character anymore. No one's really like, yes, Sandy anymore. It's like every class, the student executed that skill that's doing it, but they're not putting it all together. And so I thought that was really unusual when I went to like large scale companies, is that like, these are not just standalone skills. It's not like my dad used to have a toolbox where you pull out the little like special, like here's all the screws and here's all the drill bits. It's not like that. It's more like a toy box where like all these skills exist together and you're the toy box kind of idea. So I guess I just didn't realize that I had before I entered Second City and IO and all kinds of stuff, that I had already had like a breadth of experience behind me that I just learned through trial and error, which I think is a different way, which can be a very difficult way to learn it too, because it's like a lot of bar prov, performing with a bunch of drunk people and all this kind of stuff.
Sure.
But it's just a different way to look at, like that one analogy of like the blind people touching the elephant. It was just my way of discovering the elephant. And it's not better or worse. It's just a totally different way of coming at it.
Yeah. I love how you talk about improv, because like you're not just a performer and a teacher. I would at least hope it's fair to say you're like a philosopher of improv. Like you're like a think leader of improv, and you don't just talk about like how to do a good scene. You talk about, just like you were saying, like how the greater part of the art form and how it evolves and how it, like different things intersect with each other. Like is that just kind of how it's always been, or is that something you grew into?
Oh my gosh. First of all, I'm very flattered. I've never had anyone say that to me before. I'm so flattered that you express that in that way. That's so amazing. I guess in forming my own path, I had to do that because I couldn't just read a book about how do you play dubbing. I couldn't read a book. I had to like see it performed, explained in one sentence, and then I had to explain to other people about why that's funny. And then so I think the answer that I've just always had to be that way in order to pursue improv.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people in improv expect a school or institution to kind of lay out the path for them, and at the end of the path, they're improvising. And I think ultimately, I think it's more like this very cliche thing of we're a tapestry of all the teachers that teach us. Is that like Liz Allen might teach me one or two things like, oh, I really like that concept, and Jay Suko might teach me one or two things like, oh, I really like that concept. Instead of like I am the brand of the machinery that I went through. So I think it's just the way that I've always had to be in order to like pursue improv in my journey, as opposed to the journey of a brand.
Wow,
that's a great question. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I'm really honored. Thank you so much.
Yes, dude. Like I'm so happy to get, like I know we could talk for 4 hours. I'm trying to just like get the best questions that I could come up with. So like improv is a lot of things, right? When I got into it, it was because I wanted to be a comedian, and it appealed to me a little more than stand-up or sketch, or at least it was easier access for me. So it was all about like performing for audiences. But improv is more than that, and as I've discovered throughout my journey, how would you how would you describe improv in all of its facets?
That is such a large question because
Sorry.
So So I moved to England and I got my MA in improv. I got an MA in drama, and all my research was in improv. And my thesis there was that the improviser's voice is the most valuable thing they bring to the team and to the show, because that's how we get all the diverse stories that come out, as opposed to telling the same story over and over again. So in doing so, here I am in England, which is renowned to have a very robust theatrical history, heritage. And in England, like the improv world is starting to really take off really fast.
Nice.
But none of my teachers knew what I was talking about. So I would say like, oh, I'm going to do improv. And they'd be like, have you seen this show? I don't want to throw this name out because I thought it was a great show, but it's just totally not improv. Have you seen this show, X, Y, and Z? It's like, oh no, it's like, oh, they do improv, they do fantastic. And I'd watch this show, and they would use like kitchen, like a salt and pepper shaker and like a mustard bottle. And then it was specific to like maybe a Shakespeare play. And so they picked this dinner condiment based on how it best represents that character, and they'd remake Shakespeare plays. And I'm like, I think that's very interesting and creative, but that is borderline puppetry. That's not really improv because they are still following a script, and they knew that they were setting all this stuff up ahead of. They didn't like go into a kitchen and go like, oh, I'm going to grab this tape roll and I'm going to grab this Dove box and this mouse and now I'm going to make it. They went, oh, a couple weeks and I think I'm going to pick this thing and I'm going to go buy this special brand of ketchup because the character's name happens to be the same name as his ketchup. And so then recently I'm going for my PhD in improv. And one of the notes I got from my teachers was like, I think you need to spell out improvisation every single time you say it. And I'm like, but wait a minute, I'm not talking about general improvisation. I'm talking about short form, long form improv. And if you're a practitioner of improv, the colloquialism, but I think it's also the definition because the culture kind of defines the language, is improv. We don't talk to each other like Richard, you and I are talking. We don't go like, oh, hey, you're going to come see my improvisational show? No, you don't. But, so I just think that it's really interesting that it doesn't have the awareness or credibility here that I thought it would have. That even if it doesn't have the academic credibility, I would assume my teachers would have seen Whose Line Is It Anyways, or would be aware of these major improv schools in town. Like, so in my PhD, that's like the first thing I have to do is define what is the genre I'm talking about. And please excuse me if I'm talking too much because you're like, totally...
It's a talk show. It's exactly what I like.
But you're like talking about stuff that I love to talk about.
I love it.
But improvisational is so broad, commedia dell'arte. And then like what the theater community here knows improv for is using it to develop work, but not as a standalone piece. Like I would use improv to develop a stand-up set, but I wouldn't go perform improv on stage. But improv is so big and broad that I really try to focus it down into long form, short form improv, because otherwise it's too broad. Because conversation is improv, podcasts are improv. Like improv exists in everywhere. Like the stuff I'm reading is like when you open your mouth. This blows my mind if I think about it too much. When I open my mouth, I don't know what the last word of that sentence is going to be. I didn't know the last word in that sentence was going to be the word be. I just know that I have an idea, and I just trust that that sentence will end correctly. Like I didn't know that last word was going to be correctly. But if I think about it too much. If I think about it too much, it's like, I'm going to say a sentence and I have not pre-planned what the last word of that sentence. So will it sound eloquent? We'll find out when I finish that sentence. So like improv, but like so I've worked with you before. I've worked with you on a project before. And I think you and I are very similar in that improv pervades into everyday life so much, or at least the skills, like Harold doesn't pervade into everyday life, but the skills of connections and empathizing, all those things pervade in everyday life all the time. Yeah. All the time. I mean, would you say that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to me, like, because improv as a performance is awesome, but like underneath it, the thing that is everything, it's about like, am I affecting you? Are you affecting me? Are we connected? Are we listening? It's empathy, like you said. And I think it's when practiced, at least the way that I practice it, and the way that I think most people that we know practice it is, it's a very generous art form. It's not about me, me, me. And if you try and make it me, 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 it kind of fails.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, which is, so like because of the lockdown, I've been into this, and because I think my whole career has been in analysis, I've been analyzing different phases of improv. So one of them is this concept of the improv ecosystem, because I think for years we've talked about improv communities. And what I've noticed is that communities can actually be toxic or damaging. An entire group of people can actually be toxic or damaging, like with the use of like a systemic racism or whatever. Or you just have people like community leaders develop because either A, the community has elected them or decided that they're good, or sometimes community leaders elect themselves and say that I have these resources that a group of people wants, so I can gatekeep about who gets what, who, what, when, where. So in clicks form, that can be very damaging. So in Improv Ecosystems, the project I just did, I have all the research that I did, right? It's surveys and interviews just for free because I thought it would benefit other improv regions and stuff. But everyone across the board says that they want to have different improv companies in their city. They want to have different improv philosophies. They want to have tons of teams in their cities, and they want all those teams and all those players to collaborate and mix together. And whether they owned a company, they wanted that, or whether they were a student that just started, they wanted that. Whether they have been doing it for years or just started, everybody wants that diversity. Everybody wants all those different teams.
Yeah.
But there are some improv companies that have like non-performance clauses where you can only perform with them and you can't take classes anywhere else.
Yeah.
And there's companies that try to be the only game in town, and they'll use like really icky like business tactics to get there, you know, like try to do a show on the same night and gossip about the other team or whatever it is. But everybody across the board wants the diversity and they want that collaboration. So yeah.
Well, and research shows that I mean, it's not just them, that benefits everything. Like, it benefits government when there's more diversity, business when there's more diversity, community groups, schools. Like, it's the research is so overwhelmingly, like, the evidence is there. It blows me away when people still have this mindset. So I'm going to skip to a question I was going to say for later, but an idea that I've heard for the first time just in the last year that I fell in love with is the idea that we are no longer in the scarcity economy, we're in the connection economy. And I feel like you are such a hub for connection, that you've really helped. You know, obviously there's been plenty of other people too, but I feel like you are such a leader in bringing value to improv by connecting people, by all across the world. Like do you? I'm assuming you would agree with that. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
You're the first person that's ever phrased it to me that way. Like, when you introduced me, that's the first time I've ever had anyone like, wow, someone like has listed my accomplishments. And I think about that. You asked me all that stuff that I've never been asked or thought about before. I want to ask you a question just to clarify. When you say scarcity economy, what do you mean by that?
So as it was explained to me, and I've only studied this in the last year, but it's the idea that used to, the idea was, if I have the most things and you don't have it, then I win. If I'm Coca-Cola and I sell more cans than Pepsi, I win, right? Whereas, like, if you're an author, which we both are, like, we blurb each other's books, we review each other's books. Like, the head of Verizon isn't going to blurb about the new Apple iPhone, or the competitor's phone or whatever, right? But we like, oh, have you read David's book? You should read David's book. Oh, you should read Steven's book. Oh, you should read Bill's book, whatever, all these different books. Like, I want to do that, and you want to do that, and like, we're, by connecting people, we're helping people, as opposed to just read my book, don't read any other books. That's more of the scarcity mindset.
That's fantastic. One of the reasons I ask is Brene Brown talks about scarcity versus abundance, and like there's abundance. So one of the things that I think that when students come into a class and they make bad decisions, it's because they're afraid. And when they're afraid, it's because it's actually the opposite of fear is not hope. Hope is actually a component of fear. They're afraid because they hope to do a good job, but they're also afraid that this is their one chance. They better look good in front of everyone because this is their one chance. And that's like the scarcity model. But the abundance model is, this is like the first of like thousands of chances you would have to perform. So it doesn't matter. You might perform 10 times this one class. Don't worry about it. Yeah. But like, if you're scared, so like, this is the one chance I have to do a good job. So that's where I completely am attuned to you. I guess the only thing that I would say that is not in disagreement, it's just like in a different vein, is I hope it's a connection economy. I hope it is, because I see there's so many times when it isn't. Like, I've seen so many. Here's something related. I just posted about this on Facebook that's so sad and interesting to me, is the number of times I've had conversations with people about my community turned against me. And people I thought my friends were all of a sudden not my friends anymore because I was outcast. It's a sizable number. But the thing that it's like, that's fine, that exists. It exists in almost any business, in any community, any school, anywhere ever, where there's a group of people, sometimes there's people that don't fit into that community.
Yeah.
But what I don't think people realize is how emotionally traumatizing that is like how much it's not just like well, you're not doing improv with us. People feel like they've lost their support network, they've lost their voice, they've lost their place in the community. And there's some people that actually causes depression. Like, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So to be like really authentic and vulnerable with you, because I know that I can do this, is that one thing that I've struggled with my whole life is this feeling of loneliness. It's like I felt lonely, and it's a really, am I allowed to cuss on here?
All the time. Cuss all the time.
It's a really shitty feeling. Like, it causes depression, and you can be in a room full of people. You could have huge families, you could have thousands of roommates, but you could still feel alone.
Oh, yeah.
It's not the presence of people, it's like the connection to people. So when I do improv, that's kind of like why I want to draw the audience in. That's why like the improv boost is about like, you're cool, there's space for you, is because I know what it's like to feel lonely, and I don't want other people to feel lonely. Wow. So when you say it's a connection economy, I hope it's a connection economy. I don't think that's always true. I see some people's insecurities sometimes cause them make like choices based in ego. Like you just said, when it's all about me, it doesn't work. And I agree with that, but that doesn't mean I don't see it, you know?
Oh, I mean, we're not fully, it's not like 100% connection economy. It's like, according to what I've read, it's like more of transitioning. Like ever since really the internet kind of became as big as it was, now all of a sudden the connection is starting to bring more value than the scarcity. And it's, as everything, some people will die fighting the change, but
I just saw this Facebook group that's like, we're holding an online improv festival, and we're the first ones in the world to do that. And I was like, what? Like, you obviously, nobody in your community or your group is connected to because it was happening even before quarantine hit. Like there's a group called the Online Improv Festival. Like, that's why that group exists, And so I was like, there are people. One of my friends, Chris Meads, I think I love this quote. I said it. There's nothing more frightening than small men with small empires. Like, people just want to keep the community and create these walls and go, this is where I have influence, so I'm going to protect that. And I think a lot of people are afraid to give up that influence. But what I found, especially with the improv boost, is when I give to improv, I know that sounds so weird, like it's like an entity, but when I get to improv, I get so much more out of it. Yeah. Like, so I think that like creating these little bunkers is so much more destructive than going, let's talk and connect, let's empathize.
From your lips to God's ears, sir. So, what was the impetus behind the first book? What made you think, I want to write an improv book?
Well, it's not as what would you say? It's not as mysterious as someone might think. Is that like, I knew I was going for my PhD in improv, and my previous supervisor, he ended up not being my supervisor, told me that once you get your PhD, every book you write is owned by the university. I was like, really? Oh my gosh! So I was like, although that's okay with me, I would like to have one book that I own. So I thought, like, I'd like to have one book before I get my PhD. So if I really wanted to, I could do different versions of that book. I could do addendums to that book, and da-da-da-da. And it's so funny because when I decided that, and it's just like, it's so stupid to say, it's just like improv, where you let yourself open to the world, and if you don't control it and just kind of let yourself flow, it happens. I wrote that book like in 2 or 3 weeks. Like, I just would come home and just start writing. And Monica's like, what are you doing? I was like, I don't know, I just want to write this book. And it just kind of like, I never second guessed myself. It just kind of flew out of me. And so it was just I don't know, it's a really funny, other people might have a hard time writing a book. Where do they start? And for me, it was just like, I'm going to do this. And it just kind of all just came out of me. You know why? Like Stephen King says, good writers don't write stories, they catch them. They're like stories in the air, and as long as you're like leaving yourself attuned for the story, it'll flow through you as a conduit. So I'd like to think that happened a little bit, because I literally, like, in 2 or 3 weeks, every day I was just writing on it, and it wasn't a chore. I was really excited to be writing about it.
Wow. 2 or 3 weeks.
How about you? Like, did you have a hard time writing your book?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, because I did not catch it all in one. I caught it over years. Like, it was like, maybe one day I'll write a book. I'll write some notes 6 years later. Maybe I'll turn these notes into a book 2 years later. I'm finally done with the first draft. A year later, it's published, right? Like, that was my journey. So I'm both excited and quite jealous. You talk about San Diego, L.A., now England. What were these different and currently what are these different markets like to go from one to the other and learn from different people and perform and that kind of thing?
That's a fantastic question. Now, this I have to. So there's this thing that I'm studying called disciplinary landscaping, and what disciplinary landscaping says is that like the metaphor is if you were to be like a bird's eye point of view to look at a piece of land, you'd be able to see the hills and the valleys and the trees and the lake. But we don't view the landscape that way. We view it from like a horizontal perspective. So sometimes hills will block the trees, or trees will block the lake, or we won't see valleys because we're limited by our perspective of it. Now, the reason this is important in academia, and it's probably also really relevant in improv as well, is typically what's been identified as valuable, or what's been identified as good improv, has been told from whatever the dominant narrative is, or the privileged class. In this article I read is that whatever the privileged class does is seen as sophisticated, while others not part of that privileged class, it's seen as like off the wall or the exception or whatever it is, right? So I just want to identify that what I'm going to share with you is from my perspective of looking at the landscape, which is very limited. It's just my time and the place I was at the time. So in San Diego, which was like 1994 to, I don't know, 2001-ish, at that time, there was very little internet. And there wasn't a lot of improv going along in San Diego. And I lived like North County San Diego. I lived like an hour and a half away from downtown San Diego, where there probably was a lot more theater and a lot more options. But I did look for like, I found like a company there that I took a class at, and I was like, oh, this training is not my style. And it was very much like, it wasn't comedy improv, which is what I was interested in because these were short form games. But it was one of the things that really stuck with me that I remember to this day, and this is in 1994, the teacher's like, da da da, if it's not funny, it's dramatic. And I remember going, no, it can just fail. Like you can just do bad, and that's okay. Like to me, especially when I was younger, I loved failing. I loved like the bomb because I'm like, now I have to figure out how to get that audience next time. If you succeed, you have nothing else to learn. Really, you're like, okay, I did great. Just gonna repeat that skill and all that kind of stuff. But when I failed, I was like, okay, I know I can get those people to laugh. How do I get what is the mechanism, or what is it that I need to learn to make those people laugh? So I think as an artist, and this might not be a very popular opinion, but we have to be able to fail. We have to be able to recognize I didn't do well that time so that I can be better next time. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong.
Yeah.
But at that time, so things have changed so much, but at the time I found San Diego did not have a very robust improv community, and the stuff it has was very, at that time there's this concept of camps. There was a Keith Johnsonian camp, and it was like the Del Close camp. So there's like these camps, and they didn't really talk to each other very much. So then I moved to LA, and that was opening my mind to like, oh, there's all these big corp companies that do this now. There's improv all over the place. And I think the criticism I have there is I also learned how influential cliques can be, large cliques or small cliques. And when you're in a community, people like to have cliques because it's safety and security. This research I'm talking about says that the reason that social animals collaborate is because it provides patterns, it provides expectations, provides organization in a world that's very chaotic. Because we don't know what the weather's going to be. We don't know like if that plant's going to have a fruit on it next time we show up. So the reason that we form cliques or these kind of like allies is because then there's more sustainability to our emotional system. So I get why they form, but I also like found, especially in LA, that if you had a new idea or a new team, it was very difficult to find stage time unless you had the connection to have the stage. It was very hard to fail. It was very hard to have that experimental theater or that experimental show, because LA, of course, is a huge entertainment industry that draws all these people and it had these huge companies and da-da-da. So that was tough. But growing up, I always just created my own opportunities because there were no other improv opportunities. So I just started all these other teams and stuff like that. And then moving to England, the big difference I see here is like, which is so interesting to me. Now, this is the caveat. That's not the difference between the United States and England. It's the difference between Los Angeles and England.
Sure.
Because Los Angeles is a very entertainment industry. And yeah. I feel like there's a lot of entitled people in LA. And one of the reasons that like, I remember I would drive and people would cut me off and then honk and flip me off. Like, what? You're the one that cut me off. Like, what are you talking about? And then one time I parked somewhere and this guy like ran up to me, he was like, oh, can I have your parking spot? Because my mom and dad are here. And I was like, no, I have an audition. I have to go I can't look around. It's like, fuck you. And I'm like, what are you talking about? spot. Like, you're not entitled to it. Like, so like people are like, so some people, but there's a lot of entitled people in LA.
Yeah, there are.
Which I think lends to like the social media selfies and all this kind of stuff.
Sure.
So I moved to England, and England was in LA. As a coach, you're kind of like, okay, be part of the ensemble, step back, give other people space, be part of the ensemble, be part, Whereas in England, I feel like it's much more polite. And so it's more like, no, you can step forward. No, we want to hear your voice. Step forward. You're doing a good job. Step forward. Nice. So there's that difference. And I think another difference is the difference between like Del Close and Viola Spolin in the United States, as well as Keith Johnstone in England. And Keith Johnstone did like theater sports and Loose Moose Theater. And it was still improvisation, but it's not what we'd call long-form, short-form improvisation. It wasn't as ensemble as probably you and I are more familiar with, or other people listening are more familiar with.
Yeah.
So it's like where the maestro in theater sports came from, which can still be very directed. Like, although it's improv, if we were doing a show, I could be like, okay, edit. The next scene's going to take place at a diner. It's going to have these two characters go, and so I'm still in control. I'm still directing. Whereas, the reason like improv is getting really popular in England is the westernized view of the ensemble. It's like, okay, there's 8 of us. None of us are in control, but at the same time, all 8 of us are in control. We're all going to contribute. My idea is just as important as your idea. Let's see what happens. And there's a magic there. I think what people are drawn to is that collaboration is entertainment, is that audiences come and go, wow, they cooperated. Not like at work. Oh, wow, they cooperated. Not like my family back home. It's like, and so I think people go, oh, look, you can do that, and it can be funny. And like, that gives them this, like, because I think a lot of improv is about hope. I think it's a lot of, okay, the world can be like that. One thing I used to say is when I was coaching people is that audiences love to see the character struggle. Yeah. So if you're in a scene and someone's fixing a bike, they don't care if you fix the bike. Like, if you fix the bike, like, the audience isn't going to leave the stage going, oh, they fixed that bike. Great. Woo! Yeah, exactly.
I was worried there for a second.
But if for 5 minutes you're doing like this weird shtick and someone's trying to buy the bike and all of a sudden like the house is on fire and the dog's barking, the audience loves to see you struggle. And I used to say that for a long time. Oh, yeah. More recently with my study, I don't think it's struggling. I think the audience loves to see someone have hope. That if that character on stage can hope to fix that bike and that fire and the dog barking and someone trying to buy it, then maybe when I go home and I'm dealing with my own stuff, I can struggle. I can fight with it too. So I think that what the audience loves to see is collaboration, and they love to see hope. They love to see people thinking it can be better.
Wow. I love how you frame it as hope, right? Because like I just tend to think of it as like, oh, displaying emotions is funny, but like the underneath idea of like, oh, I this gives me hope of how I can be. That's like even deeper. That's cool.
Well, I have a question for you. Am I allowed to ask you questions?
Whatever you want. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
We're improvising here.
I don't know the answer to this question, and maybe it's unimportant, but this is where I'm asking this question.
Yeah.
So in improv, we are told, or a lot of people are taught, pick an emotion and enter the scene. So I don't know what's happening in the scene yet, but I'm going to pick anger. Or I don't know what's going on yet, but and then I can adapt this to, if you make me a police officer, I'm a police officer. I could be a clown. I could be like a dog. But I picked this emotion, whatever it is. And that emotion is going to drive a lot of my decisions. But in reality, in life, we don't know what emotions we're going through until we've evidenced the behavior. They say emotions are evidenced. Like, so I could be like, fine. All of a sudden I start crying and I go, I guess I was sad. I didn't know I was sad the whole time. Or later on I could be like, yesterday I was just in a funk and I didn't realize it. I was biting everyone's head off. I'm so sorry. Like, so we don't know emotions are happening until we analyze the behavior. But in improv, we tell people to have the emotions that then drive the behavior. Why do you think we reverse it? Or should we reverse it? I don't know. What do you think about that?
I love everything you're saying, because like I get in depressive episodes and I have anxiety and all the stuff that so many people in improv deal with, but I rarely know I'm in a depressive episode until either right at the end or after I've come out of it. So that's really like illuminating what you said about like, oh, I'm not aware, like, oh yeah, that is true. Yeah. Like, but as far as like, because I tell people to come in with an emotion just because I want to give them something that helps fuel the fire. I mean, to me, like, I agree that we don't know emotions till afterwards. I'm just forming these thoughts now, so I could totally like backtrack tomorrow. But
improv.
Improv. But But what feels right to say is that because it's an entertainment, because we're displaying, because theater is never real life. It's all, there's truth to it, but like you're never simulating real life exactly. That would be pretty boring theater most of the time, right? Even the most outlandish true stories, you still dramatize them, theatricalize them, whatever. And so to me, the idea of coming in with emotion is a way of dramatizing the connection that we're improvising, as opposed to like replaying what would actually happen to real people.
Legit. That totally makes sense to me. That totally makes sense. Yeah. Totally...
All right, great.
Like I said, I didn't have an answer to that question. I've been thinking about it, but
I didn't know I had the answer until then. I didn't know that this sentence would end with this word until right now.
Oh. Yeah. That's interesting, because I think I agree with you. There's improv in theater is not realistic. We don't cheat out 3/4 to an imaginary audience when we're talking to people. Sure. We don't stand at that distance. There's a comfortable distance between two people talking in real life that's different than on a stage, which is this concept of proxemics. But there are people, and I'm not saying that I agree with them. I totally agree with what you said. There are people that say, replicate real life on stage. Whatever you do in real life, put that on stage. But I agree with you. I think there's times that we have to project the person in the back can hear us, and that's not realistic. So yeah.
I don't know the nuances of what people who say that are talking about, but like there's a chapter that I wrote in my book that I call Improv is Not Real Life. Because I've had so many students, like I'll be in a, they'll be in a scene. I'll be like, here's an option you could have done if you, want, because they feel like they're stuck or whatever. And I go, oh, well, you could have done this, you could have done that. And they're like, well, I wouldn't do that in real life. And I go, so you wouldn't hold an imaginary banana and pretend it's a real banana in real life too. You'd get shipped away. Like I don't care what you do in real life, like it's like there are things about improv that help real life that we can extract, but I don't want to talk to a human being off stage the same way I would talk to, an improv partner on stage, because it's a different purpose.
I completely agree with you. There's this concept that like, in our everyday life, we're problem solving. Like if I'm hungry, I go find a sandwich. We're in everyday life, we're problem solving, but artists are problem seeking. So like we talked about fixing the bike, or let's just say we're doing back to like making a sandwich. It's like, if the scene was like, I'm hungry, I should never get that sandwich, or I should have a hard time getting that sandwich. Yeah. Because that's what's going to be better than literally giving me the sandwich. Okay, give me the sandwich, scene's over, we're done. So artists are problem seeking, and in real life we're problem solving. So I totally agree with you. This thing that I've been like thinking about for a while, I'm like, oh, I should just ask you from the start. I'm gonna ask you next time I have a question.
I will geek out on deep talk, philosophy of improv, or most anything, anytime, all the time, and I'm honored that I could like throw some light on something. That's fantastic. The Everybody Let's Get In Here festival. It was huge. I was honored to be a part of it. Thank you again for that. I got to meet Steven, who's amazing. What a great interviewer. That was fantastic. There was so much to it. It was so big. I saw the numbers. I don't know if they're like, is that like the biggest improv festival that's ever happened? Like, do we have numbers on that? Do we know?
I don't know. I don't know how to compare it to other festivals either.
I wouldn't know either, but I mean, it's got to be up there.
Hopefully, that'd be great.
I mean, 51,000 views. Like, come on.
Yeah,
that's
across
insane.
The board.
That's bigger than a lot of towns who have improv theater.
It's true. That's true. That's true.
What was it like putting on? I mean, an online festival, one is its own thing, but then something as big as that, as coordinated as that, as international as that. What was that journey like?
So one thing that I think is really, that I've been interested in, that's been drawing my attention a lot during this quarantine, is kind of like blowing apart these concepts that we hold in improv that we've just accepted. And so, and a simple example is, I wanted to take an improv course, and I put out an email, put out a post, and said, who wants to take an improv course with me? Not as a teacher, I'm not teaching, but as a peer. Like, who wants to take a class with me? And tons of people. I was like, oh, awesome. Wow, oh my God, I expected like 4 people to be like, yeah, that's cool, 4 people. But I was like, oh my God, this is too many people. And so then I said, okay, cool. So I contacted some schools, and they never got back to me, which I thought was so odd. Fine. I thought, I'm giving you like a sold out class. I'm basically
Yeah, right.
giving you 2 sold out classes, and I don't understand why you don't. It's fine. It's okay. It's quarantine. I don't judge people. Maybe they're super busy and stuff's going on. Really. So what I did was like, who's a teacher I've always wanted to take a class with? Liz Allen. Awesome. So I'll contact Liz Allen, and she said yes. And so then now we have these 2 classes going on. Like, cool, I get to take a class with my friends, which is really awesome, with a teacher I've always wanted to take a class with. What an awesome experience.
Perfect.
Well, it blew apart this idea of an improv school. It's like, we've always felt like if you want to get good training, you go to an improv institution.
Sure.
I think improv institutions are fantastic and they create a lot of opportunity. I'm not anti-institution for sure. But I think what happens is, just like the Pixar way, when Pixar was creative at first and then it had to find out a way to be more efficient, what a school typically has to do is come up with a curriculum so that whoever's going through that course has the same quality experience as the person taking the course right next to them. And they might have 4 or 5 teachers that are teaching level 1, and all those teachers have to provide that same quality, which I think is totally feasible, especially in a business institution. But what you're doing too is, if Rich, you're teaching a class, and then like, I don't know, if Liz Allen's teaching another class, you 2 have different teaching styles, and you have different skills, and you have different like powers, like a superhero, like you're an X-Men, you're Colossus, and she's Shadow Cat. And so like, I am not getting the powers of Colossus. I'm getting what the school's teaching you in the way it's telling you to teach. Like some schools even lay out, here's the warm-up you do, here's the lesson you need to hit, here's the exercise. And you might be like, yeah, but I got a better warm-up than that. Or I got an exercise that's going to work better for this class. And so I think that I don't get the chance to really benefit from having such a great teacher. But if I just reach out to the teacher and I go, what are your thoughts on what the foundations of improv are? Here's what I've always thought. And so like, oh, it's awesome. I get to hear your personal philosophy. And like I said, I've always been someone that like takes a little bit from each teacher. I'm like, awesome. I can hear what you're passionate about and drives it. So this festival, everybody getting here, Improv Festival, to me has kind of blown apart the concept of a festival as well. Typically festivals, not all festivals, but typically festivals are run by one entity. There's an umbrella entity, or there's a partnership. Yeah. And they go, okay, we're going to run it for this weekend or for this week or whatever. So we're going to see this is our goal and our vision statement, blah, the teachers and blah, blah. But what we did everyone contributed, but person that really influenced me is Michelle Gilliam from Improv MKE. Great. We just had 8 companies come together, and we said, what happened was, I talked to William Rowe and someone else. I'm like, I have some money and I just want to hold like a weekend for like 5 classes and 2 shows, like something super simple. So we were talking, and I talked to my friend Carla Dingle at Queen City Comedy, and she's like, oh my God, we're gonna do a festival that same time, like the week after. I'm like, dude, I'm just gonna do weekend. I will jump on board with whatever you're doing. So what I think the future of improv is, which I think is really also landmarked by the AICE of the Second City Teachers unionizing. It's like, that's another example of it, is instead of having one institution, instead of having one community, is we're going to develop ecosystems, or what I think it's going to be is like alliances. Like a union is the very same idea and everything. Is that all 8 of our organizations came together, and we didn't try to control each other. One person didn't say like, I'm in charge here. One person didn't say, this is what the logo is going to be. We all said, what do you want to do? Okay, cool. Then I'm going to support that. What do you want to do? Okay, I'll share that. Okay, I just won't do a show the same time you're doing a show. And so it just became like this alliance where not one entity it was like an ensemble. Like the production company was like an ensemble of 8 different teams. And we all respected each other's boundaries. Like the Black Improv Alliance is like, we want to raise Black performers. And all of us like, fine, totally 100%. I want to do that too. Cool. We will share all your posts. And if we have a post that does not raise a Black voice, you don't have to share it. And there's no pressure for you to do that either. Right. So like, it was this really cool way of going, we're just gonna, just like an ensemble on stage, we're just gonna yes and each other and try to make each other's ideas look fantastic without controlling it. So it was easy in many respects, because I got one day. We each kind of said, well, let's just get one day each, and then you'll be in charge of that one day. But you can say, I'm not going to use these hours, and you can have them if you want. So I had one day, and Michelle came up with this idea of abundance, because you're talking about scarcity and stuff. And she's like, it doesn't have to be yes, but it can be yes and. So all I did was like, are there any ongoing drop-ins going on my day? Are there any other drop-ins, workshops, or whatever is going on my day? That's what I'm going to promote. I don't need to come up with anything new. I don't need to compete. I just need to go, this is what exists. Let me throw a spotlight on what exists. You all can choose what you want to go to. The thing that I was really passionate about was these authors, these book readings, because I've never seen anyone do a series like that before, where they have authors talk about their improv books. Yeah. I think it's cool.
It was so great. Yeah, because like other authors of other types of business books and philosophy books and different things, they have readings all the time. But yeah, like improv, that's the first one I ever heard of.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
We could do it in person. You can invite like authors to festivals, and they could do book readings. And then you come to the chapter and be like, let's kind of get 6 people from the audience on stage to talk about. Bam! That'd be such an awesome experience, you know?
Oh yeah, my brain has been on fire of thinking like, what are we not doing in improv that we could? Because I think like we have forged a lot of paths of like a show is 3 teams and the dream or whatever it like they've got all these little models, but it's like, what if we just shattered all those like you did and like so many others are doing and just went, what if we just did what we wanted to do and experimented and tried some stuff?
Have you been inspired to do anything or like?
Well, I started my own practice groups at the beginning of quarantine, and they don't fit any business model I've ever seen. They're not levels, and they're not like specific workshops. They're people come together, and I teach to the group. So every group's got a different dynamic, and it's like we know it's scene work, but then any given day, it's going to look just like what does this group need? And if other people are doing that, that's awesome. But I'd never heard of it before, and I was just like, let's try it.
Yeah.
Woo!
I think it's fantastic. I totally agree with that. One thing that I'm thinking about now is like I'm with you. We're like I'm always analyzing like what's the next thing or and I'm like I think a really weird way to look at it is the next thing is just be concerned with improv in your 5-block radius.
There you go.
Because we're like global. Oh my god, and I have to represent these voices and share this person. Da, da, da. But when lockdown's over, I think it's gonna be like, hey, do 5 people want to get together in my dad's garage and just do improv? Yeah. Bam, and just focus on that because that's the doing of improv as opposed to the selling of improv or the promotion of improv or the whatever it is. But then you just do it and you go like, that's why I did it in the first place because this is fun. This is fun. And I think you'll end up creating a product that people are like, oh, they're having a good time. I kind of want to see what they're doing. And then a year later, it's going to be like, oh, the 5 people in the garage improv team just because they loved what they were doing. And then who knows what's going on. I think focusing on your friends and the people you like to do improv with is going to be a thing. I know that sounds funny, but I think it's going to be the next big thing.
I think that's great. I think that gives me more hope than any other next big thing I've heard. I think it's amazing. David, it's great. I could talk to you forever, but let's tell people where they can find you.
You can find me at the Improv Boost. I have the website, improvboost.com, but I also have on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. It's reversed order. It's Boost Improv because that's what the Improv Boost is about. It's boosting improv. Yeah. It's trying to make spaces safer to newer people, focusing on healthy improvisers that don't like you were talking about me. It's like let's put the spotlight on the people that really share. Like we had the awards, and it was like, oh, cool. These are people. We see what you're doing. We see you doing tech. We see you supporting other people. Thank you so much. That's awesome. So I that's what the Improv Boost is all about. Is like rewarding the people that contribute to the healthy communities. So that's where you can find it.
I dig it, and I'll put all that in the show notes. David Escobedo, you are, it's an honor to have you on the show. I think you're one of the great ambassadors of improv, and on behalf of so many other improvisers, thank you for all that you do.
Thank you so much. Like I said, you're the first person to ever say that stuff or ask me questions like that. I feel like there's a sun inside me right now, and you're the one that raised that sun inside me. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about improv, please put them in the comments below. To get notified about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Roland and Rich's YouTube channel and click the little bell icon below. Thanks, improvisers, and keep making each other look good.